Welcome back to Grumpy Vet Garage. If you've been watching the channel, you know that we've already tuned our 2021 Toyota Supra. It's tuned by MHD with their 93 octane Stage 2 OTS tune. With MHD, we have the ability to run a tune up to E40 ethanol. We haven't done it yet, but in this video, we're going to install an ethanol sensor, the Motiv Reflex controller, a plug-and-play harness to connect it, and also Precision Raceworks 360 fittings to connect the sensor into our factory fuel system. This setup will allow us to run flex fuel, but also port injection in the future. Quickly, I do want to go over what flex fuel is. The term flex fuel gets thrown around quite a bit and placed on products that they're flex fuel when they really aren't. Flex fuel allows the car to be able to read ethanol content and adjust the tune in the DME depending on what ethanol content is present in your fuel. With MHD Plus, we need to enable the flex fuel capability and then flash it to the DME. Once we do that, we'll have a Stage 2 tune that will adjust from 93 octane up to E40 and everything in between. Okay, with all that being said, let's go ahead and go over what I have to install. So here's all the things I've gotten to accomplish this flex fuel setup. There'll be links in the description for all this stuff, but here's the actual ethanol sensor, and I'm using Precision Raceworks 360 fittings so that this sensor will go into the spot using the OEM hose. There's a million different ways to do this, but I thought this was probably the best way to mount this sensor in the fuel system. And then we have the Motiv Reflex, which is going to act as the analyzer for the ethanol sensor, but down the road it'll also set up for port injection. And here is the connection to CAN communicate to the DME. So that's this right here will allow the Reflex to talk to the DME. This is just aux cables for various inputs that you can also put into this harness to connect to the Motiv Reflex. And then this is the plug and play harness that comes with the Motiv Reflex, and I'll again link in the description for this. It has all the connections for ethanol, connecting to the CAN, and then also port injection, which we won't be using right now. I'm going to start with installing the actual sensor and the fittings first, and then we'll move on to the wiring. Okay, to start this process with the fuel system, we're going to want to disconnect the battery. So moving to the back, you're going to want to lift up the trunk floor to expose the battery. And then before you disconnect the battery, go ahead and tie a towel or something to keep the hatch from latching because it opens electrically. And if your battery is disconnected, you'd have to crawl through the car to get back to the battery. The reason you want to do this is because your low pressure fuel pump in the tank runs on battery power initially until you crank the car. There's a lot of different reasons for why the car could be awake or asleep. And you really don't want to have any kind of guesswork on, oh, I should be fine and I can just disconnect the low pressure fuel line. You just don't want to do that. So disconnect the battery, and that way when you disconnect the fuel line, there's no way the low pressure fuel pump can pump fuel out the open line. So now moving back underneath the hood, where I'm going to attempt to put the ethanol sensor is right here. Now, with my Wagner tuning intake, it makes this area a little more congested, but you can get back in here. So further this way, you could put it in here, but there's so much congestion here with wires and the edge of the DME. This area here, while also congested, is, I believe, a better place to try to put this sensor. So the first thing is we need to pull this clip that's holding the lock that prevents the line from accidentally being disconnected. I'm not sure how it would. Be careful that you're not going to lose that, but there it is right there. It's a gray lock. Now what you can do to push back the lock on that line, this is a 10mm combo wrench. Using the open end, you can grab the retainer and push back this way while taking the line and going that way, and it should unlock the QD, the quick disconnect, and allow you to slide it back off. There is going to be some pressurized fuel in this line, especially if you've drove the car recently. So be prepared. I'm going to get another microfiber cloth, a dirty one, and I'm going to wrap it around that line so that when I pull it back, it should absorb any of the fuel that tries to spray out. I'm going to start by just draping it underneath. So I think, as you can see there, you could still see this fitting, the black fitting, by my finger. We got to push that in while pushing the hose towards this area. And it ended up not being so much the pull of the hose this way, but just the pressing it, and it did disconnect. So I've had in the past where you kind of had to squeeze them both together, but in this case, I just used the box end part of the 10 mil, and it just popped it right off. So I've had it kind of draining for a minute. Let me keep it going. Okay, it's still dripping a little bit, but as you can see, here is the fitting free. So now looking at the actual 360 fitting, you'll see a small side and a large side. This is for a 3/8 quick disconnect, and this is for a 5/16. 5/16 is what this line is, and 3/8 is what the fitting is on the Continental ethanol sensor. So I thought about installing the fittings individually and then placing in the actual ethanol sensor, but it was actually a little difficult to get the fittings to slide over the new ethanol sensor. So I think this might be the best way to do it. So I have it orientated so that the plug is towards the passenger side, because that's where the wiring is going to come from. But up here is the stock line connected to the 360, and the actual sensor is tucked down behind the engine. It doesn't seem to want to come in focus. Pretty tight back there, but I think it's also out of the way and a good location. Okay, so I let the pump prime, and I also ran the engine. No issues, no leaks of any kind, and that's what you need to have. There can't be any leaks on your fuel line. So if you have a leak, you need to readjust. You need to figure it out, because this is an area where you just cannot have a leak of any kind. Okay, so moving on to wiring. First thing we're going to do is install this unit right here, and we're going to do that inside the car in the passenger wheel well. First thing you're going to need to remove is this panel that's underneath the dash. Flipping it over, it's got two twist knobs, this one here and that one over there. You undo those, and then you can pull it down and pull out this panel. So next, coming in with a trim tool, something like this, we're going to need to remove this panel. There's just clips holding it in, so you need to pry those clips back and remove this panel. So here are the two panels removed. Right here you can see that it's actually keyed for them to go together. So you need to remove the interior door sill panel and the footwell panel, but it's 3 clips on the footwell panel or the kick panel, and then the sill panel has 4, and you need to remove both panels. So now with that out of the way, you can grab the carpet, which has really thick foam on it, and pull it back, and then you need to remove this plastic cover to access the plugs behind it. Okay, so with the carpet pulled back, we're going to turn around and need to disconnect plugs 3B and 7B. So they're both disconnected. This white connector here is 7B, and then this black connector here is 3B. On 3B, we need to slide out the blue section. It'll come out this way. And then on 7B, the white connector, we need to remove the black part of the connector and slide it out. So I'm going to do that and come back. Okay, so as you can see, I pulled out the black one out of 7B and the blue one out of 3B. I went ahead and closed let me show you on this one. I went ahead and closed the latch. That takes tension off this end of the connector so that you can flex it out to release the wafer on the inside. But now I need to locate the pins and then pull out the appropriate pins on both connectors. Okay. Starting with the blue connector that came out of 3B, we're going to need to remove the pins 1 and 24. And then for connector 7B and the black connector that slid out of it, we need to remove pins 35 and 36. You need to follow the actual pin number that's actually in the connector. And it's hard to show on camera, but the numbers are actually on the actual connector of what that pin socket is. So 1 and 24, 35 and 36. Those are the ones that need to be removed. Okay, so I got all the pins pulled, and I found that as you're pulling these pins, the connector that's supplied, you probably want to go ahead and just start installing them into the new connector. So you got your pin 1. This is your pin 24 on the other side. And then next to pin 24 goes pin 36. And then in between 36 and 1 goes pin 35. You'll also see that as you pulled the wires out, that 35 and 36 were wound around each other. That's because they're the CAN high and CAN low signal. They're supposed to be wound around each other. So try to maintain that orientation as you put it into the new connector. Okay, so now coming back in with the supplied connector, we're going to need to put pins into the sockets that we pulled pins out of. So the red wire is going to go into pin 1. And then the black wire is going to go into pin 24. And then as you can see, these wires are wound just like the other CAN wires. The green wire is going to go into pin 35 and the yellow wire is going to go into pin 36. Once those wires are in, you can then slide that wafer back into the main plug. So now we've made our new connector, and there's actually a retaining clip, the white clip there, that needs to be pressed in there to make sure to retain all the pins. But as far as retaining pins, any pin that you put into a socket, give it a good tug to make sure that it's fully seated and locked in place. But now that everything is assembled, we can put everything back together, and the connector that is supplied on the footwell module adapter is going to plug in to the new plug you made. Okay, so I got the cover back on. I have the actual footwell module sitting up here, or the module connector, I should say. This is where the one that's labeled, this is where the Motiv Reflex harness is going to connect into the footwell module and connect to the DME. So probably could have done this last, looking back now, but I'm going to go ahead and start working underneath the hood, and then we're going to have to feed through a connector to connect to this connector. We're going to be putting the Motiv Reflex in this cubby right here, and behind that square, you see where my finger's at, is going to be the grommet we're going to use to pass through the connector to connect to the footwell module. But there's multiple ways to get the harness from inside of this this bay right here to the engine bay. One way is underneath this connector, or underneath this panel. You can come underneath this brace and run all of the harness out this way. I have my catch can sitting here, so this isn't the way that I want to go. Also, there's some relatively sharp edges to metal that eventually I think could chafe wiring. So it's not really the way that I want to go, but you definitely can, and many instructions will actually show you going this way underneath like that. Now, if you come over here, you can see this panel, and there's already a cable coming through this panel with a grommet, and then behind it is another grommet. I went ahead and pulled that grommet out. Now you can just see it's a pass, well, right there. It's a pass through. It's big enough to get the biggest connector through, which happens to be the ethanol sensor connector. But I pulled out that block off grommet and I modified it. So let me show you what I did. So I was able to push it out this way from that panel, and I put a small cut in it to allow it to slip around the harness that I'm going to feed through there, and then push it back. It should seal the engine bay from that bay over there, but the sealing part is probably not as important as the fact that it's not going to chafe because it's being held by the grommet. So that's the access I'm going to use to get the harness through. Now, as far as the harness goes, it's best to kind of lay it out, and then after doing it, start making connections. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and start feeding the connectors from this side through that pass-through into the engine bay, and then we'll kind of see where the harness is going to lay. Not committing to one particular direction, but actually laying everything out before deciding how everything's going to be mounted is the best way to do it, especially seeing how on the Motiv Reflex, there's connectors, or one particular connector, that you need to have access to after we're done with this installation. So I have the harness generally laid out. This is the longest lead coming all the way to the front, and this is going to go down to the PCV heater down by the turbo. And then here are the port injection connectors. As you can see, there's plenty of length to get from the passenger well over to the engine. So I'll actually have to tuck some extra wiring, I think, into that passenger bay. So all of these connectors, see if you see it right there, they're labeled PCV. That one says charge pipe. They're all labeled, so there's no real way to get this wrong, on top of the fact they're not going to fit most likely on anything else. But yeah, just start connecting plugs, and that way we can start working our way back to secure the wiring over there in the passenger bay. So I have most of the wiring ran, charge pipe, intake cam, down to the PCV heater. The problem I'm having is the crank position sensor. Not because I can't find it, but because I can't reach it. So I think some of it has to do with the size of my intake manifold, but also my arms just simply can't get down in there to get the plug off and get the other one back on. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and lift up the car. The first panel in the middle of the car, behind the metal pan underneath the engine, gives you access to that area where the crank position sensor, also the fuel feed coming up from the back, all that stuff is right there. So I'm going to lift the car up so that I can get access to that sensor. So maybe not the best angle, but this panel here behind the metal panel underneath the engine, so where the oil drain access is, the panel behind it, that needs to be dropped. It gives you access to the whole side of the engine, actually both sides depending on what you're doing. And it's only held on with 8mm screws. So drop all the screws, and then you could see the bottom of the transmission and the sides of the engine. Okay, now that panel's removed, and you could see the transmission right there. So where we're trying to get to is, so here's the transmission cooler lines, and you see this little bracket above it. The sensor is right in front of that. Okay, I finally got the connector off of the crank position sensor. A couple tricks to kind of help you is this bracket here for the transmission cooler lines. It's attached to the side of the transmission with a number 8 E-Torx. You can remove that bolt and then slide this back. Let me see if I can slide it. Anyways, it slides, and that'll give you a little bit of room to get to the connector. You're doing it blind, but it is the connector that is right next to the bracket that you're disconnecting. There is a plug that's above it that you think is probably it. It's not it. It's the very bottom one right in front of the bracket for the transmission lines. Okay, so I finished routing wiring in the engine bay. You see the PCV heater line. I wrapped it in Tessa tape to protect it. I thought the bare wire was a bit exposed, but you're probably fine without it, but I decided to go ahead and wrap it. And then I used more Tessa tape. You could use zip ties as well to hold everything, but I thought this was probably a little, I guess, a little less aggressive on the wiring, but also I think it blends in good with the fabric tape that's already on the car. You can see it right here, all the way back. What's important to remember is, as you're going from the engine into this side bay, you don't want it to be tight or straight, I should say. You want to have a little bit of a curve to it. Just like all the other wiring coming from fixed positions around the engine moves around, so you don't want to have a straight, tight spot with the wiring. So put a small curve. It doesn't need to be this big. I just made it this big because I didn't want it to rub on the connector on the high pressure fuel pump. So this is how I routed it. And just take your time and kind of scrutinize everything you look at. Like, is this going to be okay? Is this going to rub on something? And then just be smart about it and route it into the passenger bay. Here's the harness for the Motiv Reflex. Need to figure out what's going to be the best place to mount the Motiv Reflex in this bay. So I'll have to clean up the wiring in here. But as you can see there at the back, that center grommet, that's where your connection to go to the internal wiring is going to be. So if you've not done the internal wiring, now would be the time to do it so you can get that connection done. But I'm going to go back inside and connect that connector to the footwell module. Okay, so I cleaned up a little bit of the wiring as far as like taping it to try to take some strain off the wiring. The plug and play harness does a good job of getting to everything, but I don't think the strain on the wires is relieved properly. So that's why I put a lot of tape to kind of bundle it together to make it one unit. Also, the Motiv Reflex, I'm going to mount it to the bottom side of this stay right here. And the reason I need to do that is because I need access to the port on the side of the unit so that we can update and check all that kind of stuff. It has to be installed for you to be able to update firmware in the bin on the Motiv Reflex. Now, the way I'm going to mount it is using 3M's dual lock. This stuff is really good, and it doesn't permanently adhere it to the underside. I can turn around and put 2 strips of this dual lock, and it's very, very strong. It's not really Velcro, it's more than Velcro. It's a mechanical bond that can be pulled apart, but I'm going to use that to mount this to the bottom of the strut brace right here. So again, the 3M dual lock, it'll get pressed together, and it's very difficult to get it straight back apart without flexing it. So this will hold very secure inside the bay. I got the Motiv Reflex mounted, and it is firmly in place. It's not going anywhere. So now that everything is installed, we need to download a few things and configure our Motiv Reflex Plus, and then reflash our newly configured tune on MHD. First, we need to go to the Motiv Motorsports website, and under the Support and Downloads tab, download from the firmware folder the Motiv firmware bootloader. It's a zip file. And then also we need to download the hex file that matches the serial number of your Motiv Reflex Plus. On the back of the Motiv Reflex, there's going to be a silver tab that has the actual serial number. It's going to be important to know what that is, but you're going to need to download the hex file that matches that serial number range. Second, in the MHD Plus PI control folder, we'll need to download the full control all bin file. There is additional information in the support and download section of Motiv's website. I would encourage you to look through the sections and educate yourself as much as you want about the Motiv Reflex Plus. Next, we need to download the Tuner Pro RT software. This platform is like an open source tuning software utilized by many platforms, but also utilized by Motiv Reflex Plus. Go into the download section on the right-hand side and download Tuner Pro RT. Don't be scared away by the $39.99 donation. This is optional, but again, this is a great platform, and if you can donate to them, that would be great. Now that we have all the files we need to install the firmware bootloader and Tuner Pro RT. Once everything is ready to go, I want to go over connecting the Motiv Reflex. First, you'll need a cable. The Motiv uses a USB micro, which is different from what appears to have become the industry standard in the USB-C. Additionally, this cable has to be able to transfer data. Not all micro cables can do this. If you have an old cell phone that used USB micro, it's most likely able to transfer data, but honestly, I ended up buying a cable, not so much because of not being able to find a cable, but because of the length. I didn't want to be tethered right to the side of the car with my laptop. To connect to the Motiv, you'll need to have the micro USB plugged into the Reflex Plus before putting the car into diagnostic mode. The plug being installed in the side when it's powered up is what allows you to connect to the Reflex. So first thing, using the firmware bootloader, install the latest firmware to the Motiv Reflex Plus. This will be the hex file you downloaded, the one that's related to the serial number of your actual Motiv Reflex Plus. Once you've successfully uploaded this, you have to turn the car off and then restart it to move on. That power cycle is what actually installs that firmware. So you can't install firmware and then immediately go to Tuner Pro. You have to cycle off and then turn the car back on. So now, while still connected to the Motiv, turn the car back on the diagnostic mode and then start Tuner Pro RT. Here on the screen, you'll see where it says initialize emulation hardware. Go ahead and click that. Then open the bin file, the full control all bin, and then you're going to hit upload current bin to emulator. Then you're going to select verify emulator RAM content against current bin. Now this info was based on everything I could find on setting up the Motiv Reflex Plus, but I found a problem with this setup and I had to reach out to Motiv. The problem I was having, while the Reflex was acting as an ethanol content analyzer, it was also trying to run port injection as well with the bin that you download from the Motiv website. This threw check engine lights for port injection faults. This is kind of a good thing about the Motiv Reflex and its integration with MHD Plus. If there's any problems associated with connections with the Motiv Reflex Plus, you're not going to have to guess whether or not there's a problem. It's actually going to illuminate a check engine light and show you. And when you download that check engine code, it's going to say MHD Plus code. So it's really cool. But I had to reach out to Motiv, and I reached out to Jake at Motiv, and he quickly understood the issue I was having and provided a solution to that problem immediately. The solution is, once everything is loaded and you're still connected to Tuner Pro RT, on the left-hand side, there's a menu that says parameter tree. You need to change the view to view by parameter category. Then expand the advanced setup menu and then double-click cylinders. Downloaded bin already had a value of 6 in here for a 6-cylinder B58. We need to change this value to 0. This effectively turns off port injection. So change the value to 0, click save, and then you're going to need to upload current bin to emulator and then verify emulator RAM content against current bin again. Once that's done, you can now power the car off and disconnect from the Motiv Reflex Plus. Now we need to set up the flex fuel tune in MHD. In a previous video, I went over flashing a tune with MHD, and I would encourage you to watch that video to kind of get you more familiar with what you need to do. But I'm going to quickly go over enabling flex fuel with MHD. Going to the screen where you select your map, you'll see MHD Plus Multimap. You're going to set all 4 slots to your base fuel. In my case, where I'm at, that's 93 octane. If you're somewhere that doesn't have 93 octane, say it's only 91 octane, you're going to set all slots to 91 octane. You're going to set it to your base fuel. Then you're going to select the caret in the corner of the multi-map menu and then select options. In the configure flash options, there's going to be a menu that says MHD Plus Suite. You're going to select the Motiv Reflex as your ECA or ethanol content analyzer, and then you're going to select enable flex fuel. But now you actually need to flash these changes to the DME. So now the car is tuned stage 2 on 93 octane, and as ethanol increases, the tune will increase up to E40. I went to the gas station and utilizing an online calculator, I'll leave a link in the description for that calculator. It was pretty good. I attempted to get an ethanol content between E30 and E35. I ended up with E33, which it's kind of the beauty of flex fuel. The tune will automatically adjust for E33. I also quickly want to go over why it's not a failure of the calculator for why I had E33. When you go and get pump gas, which is E10, it's really up to E10. And then with E85, it's the same thing. It's up to E85. It might be E9 in your pump gas, and it might be E70 for all we know in the E85. So using the calculator, it'll get you in the ballpark, but don't really stress over whether or not it's going to be exactly what you're looking for. And again, with the flex fuel, it takes care of that. It bases your actual tune on the ethanol content. As with any other performance upgrade that I've done on my A90 Supra, I accomplished draggy runs and pulled data logs to quantify the performance increase that we got. I went ahead and did 3 draggy runs, and here they are. All those draggy runs were 30 mile an hour to 90 mile an hour. The first being a 5.00. It was deemed invalid by Draggy due to low satellite communication, but it was the fastest of the runs. The second and third runs were 5.01 and 5.06 with an average of 5.04. These are our new fastest times. Our previous fastest 30 to 90 mile an hour Draggy runs were 5.46 seconds. So we're a full 0.42 seconds faster than before. This is a significant improvement, and I don't want to dampen the excitement about this performance improvement, but nothing really occurs in a vacuum. Temps when I did these Draggy runs were a full 20 degrees cooler than the previous ones we had done. There is a debate on exactly how much cooler air temps affect horsepower, but it can be anywhere between 1 and 1.8% increased power for every 10 degrees cooler air temp. We may be seeing 15 horsepower more just because of colder air temps than our previous runs. I kind of feel like this might be extreme, but it's definitely playing a part in the increased performance, but that's not all of it. Additionally, colder air temps can affect road surface, which definitely can affect traction. So all of these things can come into play, but it's really speculation. What we do know is the performance increase is measurable and it's clearly felt. So overall, I'm very pleased. I'm happy with the performance increase, and it's kind of what I expected. So additionally, I want to cover, there are cheaper ways to achieve flex fuel capability in your A90 Supra. I went with the Motiv Reflex and the plug and play harness to achieve flex fuel in my car because I'm trying to set it up for future upgrades. I know this route is the best route for me to actually allow for future upgrades, but you have to decide whether or not it's the best approach for you and the future upgrades that you have planned for your A90 Supra. I hope this information was helpful for you, and if it was, please consider subscribing to Grumpy Vet Garage, liking this video, sharing this video. Also, I'd like you to leave a comment on what direction that you think I should take next with my A90 Supra build. I have some ideas about what I want to do next, but I want to get your input. I'm interested in what you think I should do next with the car. If you want to reach out to me, you can do it through the comments of this video, but also you can do it through my Facebook page. The link to that Facebook page is in the video description. Additionally, we have a Grumpy Vet Garage merch store. This is a Supra specific Grumpy Vet Garage shirt. We also have hoodies that are pullover and zip up and many other t-shirts. By all means, go on there and get something for yourself. It helps out the channel to grow. The link to that store is in the video description. I've also linked the playlist of other videos on my A90 Supra, so if you want to go back and look at other videos on this build. But as always, thanks for coming and seeing me in my garage. And until next time, have a good one.